start.
We're sitting with Rania in this wonderful location called the Deer Park in Bir in Himachal Pradesh. Rania, welcome to India.
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself?
I will try. My name is Rania Masri. My name is Rania Masri. I'm a Lebanese living in Lebanon. Part of the movement in Lebanon to try to create some kind of a change. I'm a trained ecologist, an unemployed ecology professor, and a full-time political organizer.
And what's your current passion in Lebanon?
It's the same passion that it's always been since I was a child. How to be part of something that we can actually create a tangible change. Not simply participate in something so that we can feel good at the end of the day that we have done something, but actually to make a difference in our lives and in the policy. And so before, for decades, my work was activism, organizing protests, speaking out, writing policy papers, that kind of work. Over the past 3 years, I've realized that that's not sufficient. And now I've shifted to becoming a political organizer, trying to understand how do we actually seize power? How do we actually try to get into the positions of power rather than try to influence the decision makers to do less harm?
You were very much part of possibly one of the biggest environmental movements in Lebanon relating to garbage, right?
Yes.
So can you describe that a bit?
Well, in 2015, we had what became known internationally as the waste crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But for us in Lebanon, it was simply the closure of a major landfill due to political reasons, because since the early 1990s, our waste management plan has been illegally privatized.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has become a system of economic power amongst the political decision makers. How can they make more money out of the landfills? And so when one politician wanted to get a bigger share, he allowed the closure of the main landfill. We responded, and what was wonderful is how people responded, not by saying, get rid of the trash because the trash filled our streets in Beirut, but by saying, no more landfills, which was wonderful. So there was not a response of take it from the city and put it in the rural villages. It was no to landfills, and very large protest erupted from Beirut all the way to the north. And what's important in the north is it is the poorest area in Lebanon, and they protested that they do not want to accept the trash, even if they were to be bribed by the central government, which was wonderful. But at that time, there was this sense among some organizers that from the landfill protest, we will have a revolution and we will be able to change policy. We failed on every aspect. The policy has not been changed at all. Landfills have been reopened. Garbage is still being thrown into the sea, and now they're even seriously considering waste incinerators within the capital, which will guarantee a rise in cancer rates, and we already have some of the highest cancer rates in Asia. So if you think about tangible efforts, we failed. If you think about transformation, we're the people that organized in the street, and we reached tens of thousands. For a country this small, tens of thousands was quite something. Some people claimed we reached 100,000, but I'm going to stick with the conservative numbers. But so, did we transform? Did we build a social movement? And the answer is no. We did not build a social movement. And I think therein lies, for academics, a critical question, for organizers, a critical question. What is the timeline that we use when we want to assess a social movement? Do we give it a 3-year timeline, or do we recognize that every protest that we see today builds upon the protest that came before and encourages an organizing in the future? If we look at it that way, as a railroad track perhaps, then yes, the struggle is ongoing, the movement is ongoing. Many of the lead organizers in 2015 actually ran for parliament in 2018. So many of them recognized that the process had to be openly political and not one issue. So perhaps there was a transformation in that aspect. But on the ground, the situation remains extremely disastrous, and we are too few now to even protest in the streets.
Do you think one of the, I'm seeing it from our own perspective here in India, is that one of the things is that when we're actually against something, there's a lot of mobilization and you kind of feel the energy and the pulse of that. But maybe in that moment or over those moments, there isn't an adequate energy into saying, okay, if we win, if we stop the landfills, what is our alternative to the creation of garbage in the first place, or of course the larger issues of the economy and the environment and so on. Do you think that was one of the factors, or was it simply that the forces you were up against were just way too powerful?
No, I think as a fellow organizer said, the political decision makers were playing chess and we were playing backgammon. So they knew they were thinking several steps ahead, and we were organizing amongst each other and fighting over things that we should have agreed upon, you know. So we failed to build a strong organizing unit, and we failed to recognize and to give respect to the politicians that we wanted to change. By claiming that politicians are irrational, we weaken our own argument. Politicians are very rational. So let's understand what they're going to do next. And let's play the game properly. Let's play chess, which means, what shall I do in the event of X, and what shall I do in the event of X? We need to be thinking 3 steps ahead. We failed. We barely thought 1 step ahead. And there were internal divisions, and there were attacks, and there was a range of things. So were we able to sustain the movement beyond 3 to 4 months? No, not in the size that it became. We had alternative visions. Some of us had alternative visions. Some of us fell into a very seductive problem, which is when the decision maker comes to you and they say, come, tell me your solution. What do you do then? So I belong to a group that said, no, we do not engage with the decision makers in negotiation. We do not enter into a committee with them. That is not our role as citizens. And those that did enter into a committee with them were absorbed and then thrown asunder. And the politicians used them just as we knew they were going to do, and they continued with the work. So, you know, how do we play chess? And I think all too often we fail to recognize and to play chess.
Let's enlarge the picture a bit. I mean, you're in the middle of a region which has been conflict-prone for a very, very long time. All the big geopolitical forces are playing there. How does that kind of larger conflict and the environment and social justice and all kind of relate to each other?
Very much so. I mean, we don't use the word environment when we organize, because what it means to us is trees and soil. We talk about waste, we talk about pollution, we talk about health, we talk about livelihoods, and we connect it with the economy. And most definitely in our region, we are facing a struggle for our lives. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, just today, Israeli jets once again flew overhead in Beirut. So we don't have an army that is able to protect our skies or our water or our land. So we're constantly under this fear of national security, and it's real. We're constantly under the fear that our currency will drop. So we're facing a very serious threat of an economic collapse. So these are real livelihood issues. On top of them, we're facing serious environmental health concerns that are only expected to increase. So how do you generate a movement when people feel so broken? And people really feel broken, and they really feel hopeless. And they're used to being dealt these issues one at a time, rather than examining them all together. Which, what I argue, is that we don't have a state. We have politicians that treat us as they would a mafia, and just try to extort money as much as they can. That's not a state. A state has responsibility towards all its residents, not just its citizens. So we're trying to build a state. So we're trying to get people in Lebanon, citizens and residents, that means everybody who lives in the country has a stake, to recognize this as a really holistic political issue, and to be open to political discourse and political organizing, and to recognize that although the time is very short, we need to recognize that we have to be planning ahead. So we don't have the luxury of time, but we need to have the seriousness of time. And it's a very difficult situation. You know, when we look at what's happening in Lebanon, you add to it what's happening in Syria. A 6-year, 7-year war, massive destruction of the environment and the economy. You look at what's happening in Palestine, 70-year-long war and occupation, where a people's identity is being threatened, not simply ethnic cleansing and genocide, but their mere identity as Palestinians is being threatened. Within all of this, how do we talk about environmental justice?
Right. You want to